Members of the committee, if you could please take your seats and we can commence. And pursuant to Standing Order 108, this is the study of the freeze on departmental budgets. We have witnesses before us. Madame Hassard, the Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet, Senior Personnel and Public Service Renewal, welcome. Madame Meredith, who is the Chief Human Resource Officer, and Madame Laurendo, Assistant Deputy Minister, Compensation and Labor Relations. Welcome to all of you, and I understand that Madame Hassard and Madame Meredith have opening remarks. Between 5 and 7 minutes would be appreciated. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of this committee. Madame la Présidente, membres, bonjour. I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of the Privy Council Office and with my colleagues from the Office of the Chief Human Resources Officer. I understand that you're interested in how the public service is preparing for the challenges that lie ahead. As you know, the public service is an essential part of our democratic institutions, and it is also Canada's largest employer. In an increasingly complex world, the Public Service of Canada needs to be both capable of adapting and to adapt in order to remain a relevant and high-performing institution. Une fonction publique vigoureuse.
A strong public service is critical to the continued success of our country. Strengthening the capacity of the public service to provide high-quality advice to the government and excellent services to Canadians is an ongoing priority for all of us. This is why public service renewal is our top management strategy. This is especially true in the context of fiscal restraint, when difficult decisions will need to be made and implemented.
For the Privy Council as the head of the public service, focusing on two of his key responsibilities. First, public service renewal, and then the overall management of the Deputy Minister community. The Clerk, as head of the public service, supports the Prime Minister and Cabinet and plays a key role in ensuring that the senior leadership of the public service has the necessary capacity to advise on and deliver the government's agenda. He sets the overall strategic direction for the public service through his annual reports to the Prime Minister, and he is responsible for succession planning, talent and performance management for the senior leadership cadre. En tant que grande institution nationale,
as a large, complex national institution, the public service faces considerable pressures such as the globalization of most policy issues and the need for collaborative decision-making, the impact of ever-changing technologies on the way we do business and even the nature of our work, and the demographic realities of an aging and increasingly diverse population.
Our response to this changing and unpredictable environment. Fundamentally, it's about making sure that the federal public service continually improves its ability to deliver on the business of government, no matter how the circumstances change. Starting in 2006-07, the strategic foundation for the renewal of the public service of Canada has been set out in the Clerk's annual reports to the Prime Minister. The strategy has been built on 4 pillars of renewal, which are better planning, targeted recruitment, effective employee development, and infrastructure improvements to enable our workforce. 2 important committees were established to guide the work on these priorities. The Prime Minister's Advisory Committee on the Public Service, which is co-chaired by the Honourable Paul Tellier and the Honourable David Emerson, and the Deputy Minister Committee on Public Service Renewal, which is chaired by the Associate Secretary to Cabinet. Framed by these pillars and grounded in annual public service renewal action plans containing specific commitments each year, we have made good progress and we have achieved results. We have embedded integrated business and human resource planning in departments as a fundamental management practice to improve HR capacity across the government. We have consistently met our post-secondary recruitment goals, and we are steadily increasing our diversity. We strengthen the public service brand and sense of common purpose. through enterprise-wide career fairs and an improved job seeker website. We created a leadership development framework for all employees, and we are aligning our development programs within this framework. We're also moving forward with pay modernization to replace our 40-year-old system, laying the groundwork for other improvements to our back office systems. We have changed the way human resources are governed by creating the Chief Human Resources Officer, streamlining the central agency roles, and making deputy ministers clearly responsible for managing their people. These are steps we have taken as a result of a sustained and consistent strategic focus and the active participation of public service leaders, managers, and employees. These were accomplished without new funds, simply by looking at things differently. In a period of fiscal restraint, renewal becomes even more important. We still face the demographic pressures, the complexity of the issues, and the requirement for ongoing development of our employees and leaders. The need for restraint provides a further incentive and an opportunity to review how we do business and to become more efficient and effective in support of government and in the provision of services to Canadians. Our capacity to rethink the way we work, to plan, to reach out to others for good ideas, and to work together within and across departments will sustain a high-performing public service. Le rapport annuel du greffier au premier.
The Clerk's 2009-2010 annual report to the Prime Minister will be tabled this week and will set out how we will continue with our efforts going forward. The deliberate focus on people management will continue. That is, better planning, better recruitment, and better employee development. Integrated business and human resource planning is the underpinning for effective decision-making about the allocation of departmental resources and the delivery of outcomes. Recruitment must continue to meet our demographic challenges, but must be targeted, strategic, and rooted in the results of integrated planning. We must continue to develop employees and our leaders and strengthen our performance management system across all levels of the public service. A strong learning culture promotes innovative ideas as well as organizational efficiency.
It is an extremely important determinant of our future in the public service, since they are the carriers and creators of the culture change necessary for successful renewal. While continuing to emphasize people management, there will also be a new emphasis on what we call the renewal of the workplace. We need to pay greater attention to how we work, the business processes, the tools we work with, and what we do. The engagement of public servants and the harnessing of new technology are key levers to drive workplace renewal. Dans cet contexte multidimensionnel, le perfectionnement.
In this multidimensional context, the development and support of senior leaders in the public service of Canada is essential. Given the demographic challenges, we have made substantial improvements in our talent management and succession planning processes for the most senior executives. These have helped us deepen our understanding of current and future needs through better workforce analysis for our assistant deputy ministers and deputy ministers. We have also made the performance management program for senior leaders more rigorous to improve alignment with priorities and focus on results.
The Advisory Committee, in its fourth report, stated that we believe we are now seeing tangible results of the concerted efforts to renew the public service. First launched in 2006, public service renewal continues to be the top management priority led by the Clerk of the Privy Council. The past year has proven the value of having this strategy in place. A systematic review of renewal priorities and a clear reporting of progress has been published each year through the Clerk's annual reports to the Prime Minister. This has served us well, providing a means for demonstrating accountability maintaining the momentum for change, and deepening the engagement of senior leaders, managers, and public servants in this endeavour. The sustained focus on renewal will continue so that the public service is well equipped to serve the government and Canadians now and into the future. Merci, Madam Chairman.
We now go on to Madame Meredith for your opening remarks.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the Chief Human Resources Officer, and I am accompanied by the Assistant Deputy Minister, Compensation and Labour Relations, Hélène Dorando. I provide strategic enterprise-wide leadership on human resources development. We have 1,600 service points in Canada and in 180 service points in the world, and therefore the Government of Canada provides services for all Canadians around the world. Employees within the public service belong to several professional categories. Some of our people work in the Arctic, and others work out in space. We hire inspectors who work for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. We have climatologists at Natural Resources Canada and legal experts as well.
And we employ some of the most highly skilled people in the country. Many are internationally recognized for their expertise and their accomplishments. This makes us a key to Canada's competitiveness and a global economy. This afternoon, I would like to give you an overview of the size and composition of the public service. But first, I'll start with my role and responsibilities. As the Chief Human Resources Officer, my role is to represent the Government of Canada as the employer on human resources issues. I also provide strategic enterprise-wide leadership on human resources management. In terms of my employer role, I am responsible for negotiating 27 collective agreements for the core public service, the largest single workplace in Canada. My office also manages the largest pension and benefit programs in the country. In terms of enterprise leadership on human resources management, my office tracks and assesses overall performance in people management and promotes excellence in this field. And we establish common processes and policies for human resources management in the Government of Canada. My office was created just over a year ago as part of the new regime announced by the Prime Minister to improve and streamline the management of human resources. This new regime is putting accountability for the management of human resources back in the hands of deputy ministers where it belongs. My office plays a key role in ensuring deputies have the flexibility to do this. Parliament may be aware of our work through our extensive reporting. In fact, we table 8 reports annually, covering a number of topics, including employment equity, official languages, and human resources management.
I would now like to share some of the key trends we have been following. As indicated in the fact sheets we have given to the committee, the federal public service employs approximately 523,000 employees, and today I'm going to focus on the 274,000 public servants working within the federal public service. Now, the federal public service has 2 departments responsible for programs and services, such as Health Canada, whose employer is the Privy Council, and organizations, or rather distinct organizations such as the CRA. Now, these organizations have their own negotiations with their unionized employees. These organizations are all subject to similar rules as far as human resources are concerned. Looking at the 274,000 federal public servants, we see that a great majority of them, 60%, work outside of the National Capital Region or even outside of Canada. Contrary to popular belief, most of these people do not work in the National Capital Region. Further, the majority of public servants are full-time, who, in other words, hold indeterminate positions, and they represent about 86% of our resources. Now, our human resources are growing old. Federal employees are on average 5.3 years older than their private sector counterparts. Now, despite these statistics, we expect that people who leave the public service, or the numbers will stabilize at 5% a year. That is 13,000 people per year.
Service has great value. It is crucial to the success of our country in an increasingly complex world. I am confident that the human resources changes we have made over the past few months will ensure that we continue advancing our commitment to renewing the public service and developing the next generation of employees. And of course, I'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, and we'll go for the first round of questions. Madame Hall-Findlay for 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for being with us here today. My questions are going to be specifically for the PCO, for Ms. Hassard. Following on some of the discussions we had with the President of the Treasury Board with regard to the PCO budget a little while ago, because as you know, the title of our investigation is the study of the freeze on departmental budget envelopes and government operations. And if I may, I want to put a question into the record that I don't think you'll be able to answer today because it's asking for very specific numbers, but I'd like to just read it into the record so that at least we have it, and then I can ask you or to provide the answers. This has to do with is referred to the third element of the government's plan to return the budget to balance, being to undertake, continue with, and in some cases augment a number of review processes aimed at reducing costs while improving efficiency, and that over time this should result in a reduction in the size of the public service. With respect specifically to the PCO, we had main estimates asking for a $13.4 million increase to $74.5 million in the PCO departmental budget for support and advice, a 22% increase. Another increase for specifically advice and support to cabinet committees, and then I think overall that meant a $15.1 million increase to 144 million. So if I just read into the record, this is one question. Can you provide a detailed breakdown for PCO office expenditures for every year from 2005-06? So that would be on the public record. But I'm asking this because we are having a very hard time comparing line-by-line items. There seem to be differences year over year, and so we're just having a challenge making the comparison, so we're asking for your help in that. So a detailed breakdown of those expenditures on a line-by-line basis. And in that sense, the similar information for this past year, because it won't have been published, so based on this past year's budget numbers, I expect until they get finalized, and then also as they fit with this current set of main estimates. So if that, Madam Chair, if that can be in the record, and a request to provide that information. Any sense of how long that kind of information might take for us?
Madam Chairman, I think you'd be fairly surprised if I had the answer at my fingertips. I will undertake to find that information, and I will try to get it as soon as possible. I'm sure it is available.
Ballpark time frame, because we have to fit it into our work plan.
Maybe a week. Is that too long?
Right. That would be. Thank you. Terrific. Thank you very much.
Take one to remind. Thank you.
I would also like to ask, and maybe you can answer now, but also if it takes time to provide it. When we had the President of the Treasury Board here, he had been quoted in referring to some of these increases. As you may know, we expressed concern that budgets were being significantly increased this year before the anticipated freeze next year, and there was a worry that there was an element of padding so that by the time we hit the freeze next year, it wouldn't really affect the PCO the way it would affect other departments. And I note in your report, it sounds very positive. In one case, the minister referred to $6.4 million being to redress a, quote, chronic underfunding, which doesn't necessarily jive with your report today. He also referred to certain items that were extraordinary, such as winding down offices for the Olympics and G8, G20. And we really would like a confirmation of what items are being regarded now in this budget as requiring increases because they're extraordinary, and which ones are not, and therefore which ones we can look at to being not included in the frozen amount. So that, if that can be included in that information, that would be great.
Thank you. I think I understand the question, and I will undertake to get the detailed answer. But just as an overall comment, I do think it's been a somewhat extraordinary year for Privy Council Office with the G8, the G20, the Olympics, the Afghanistan Task Force, so there probably are some unusual expenses in there.
But we actually acknowledge that there are. Mm-hmm. Our concern was that those being extraordinary items would somehow that add to the figure that gets frozen, and we're of the view that if they're extraordinary, they should not actually be included in the frozen figure the next time round. Other question, slightly different topic, but related, of course, to the Privy Council and the Privy Council's activities, and it all affects what is done with the money that we spend. The Privy Council is responsible for maintaining the highest standards of professionalism and ethics in the public service of Canada. That's among the responsibilities. To whom is the PCO ultimately responsible? Just really quickly.
I think we're responsible to the Prime Minister as the minister designated for our department.
But not to Parliament, specifically to the Prime Minister?
We're here to answer to Parliament, but we're not accountable directly to Parliament.
Yeah, I think that the overall question is ultimate responsibility. Do you, I also note that the involvement of the PCO in managing the decision-making process of Cabinet, advising on structure and organization of machinery, the high-level performance and accountability in the public service. Have there been discussions between the PCO and Cabinet with regard to access to information?
This is not an area that I'm responsible for, so I'm afraid I won't be able to answer that question.
So you would not be able to tell me now if there have in fact been discussions between the Privy Council Office, the Clerk of the Privy Council and the Privy Council Office and Cabinet, notwithstanding all of these responsibilities on how to deal with access to information? Not on that topic, no. Given that as we are reviewing estimates and the funding of the Privy Council Office in this context of departmental freeze, I would ask that at some point we would be able to have someone come before the committee that could answer those questions. Finally, I would like to note in your report today, you have suggested that the clerk's 2009-2010 annual report to the Prime Minister will be tabled this week and will set out how you expect to continue with your efforts going forward. Can we also get a commitment that if it's you or someone else who would be appropriate agree to come before the committee after that report is tabled? We feel a little hamstrung having this meeting with you here today, a week before the report is tabled.
Yes, the timing is not the best. We would be happy to come back to talk about the report. We're very proud of it.
Madame Holfen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now go to the next round of questions. Sorry, Madame Bourgeois. For 8 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, ladies, to our committee. It's a pleasure to have you here again, Ms. Hassar. It's almost been a year, day for day, that you appeared before the committee and that you took up your position. I've read your documents and your letters in which you indicate that you were very aware of a fact since you have been with the public service for a while. Again, you're very aware that this public service has all the tools it needs to do its job and to do it in a certain comfort zone. So It's very important for me that you appear before the committee today and that you be made aware of certain practices which, in my opinion, are not aligned with what the management system you have described for the public service. Since 2006, 2007, various clerks have talked about the different iterations of public service renewal, and in fact back in March we were told that this and that would happen, including we would improve infrastructures to help human resources better do their work. And I see in today's brief that you say that you have started the modernization of the pay system, which had been in place for 40 years. And this is long overdue, of course. So my question to you is this. Certainly this process has started, but budgets have been frozen. So can you please tell me how you're going to go ahead with the modernization of the pay structure in light of these freezes?
I think the way that would be looked at in the current environment of an operating budget freeze is that there will still be some priorities that will be funded from central resources. At least that's how I understand it.
Est-ce que vous pourriez, dans un document...
Perhaps you could send the committee a document indicating to us how you are going to do this, how you plan to modernize the pay structure since it has been started. Next, in all of the documents I've read, I understand that from now on, deputy ministers will be responsible for managing their human resources. And I have to admit that this bothers me a little. Deputy ministers, it's not that I don't trust them, but I know that there are few departments, a year and a half or 2 years ago, this new measure was implemented. So about 1.5 to 2 years ago, there were perhaps 30 or so deputy ministers who had worked on the implementation of their human resources plan. So today, how many deputy ministers are there? How many are still there, and how many have kept on implementing that original plan? And for instance, as far as Correctional Services of Canada is concerned, were they involved in this modernization process? Did they have a say in the matter? And if so, can we see what the plans of all the departments are? I know it's a huge question.
In terms of the pay system question, and I would just simply say that the government has committed to work on modernizing the pay system, as you've mentioned, and has dedicated resources to that. And I would also say that there could be the need for further resources as the project matures and goes on to another stage. But the fact that the operating budgets of departments are frozen doesn't mean that they're completely static, that there will be choices made within those budgets that can accommodate important reform initiatives, of which this, I would suggest, is one. In terms of the deputy ministers managing human resources, I would, and sort of concerns that you have, I'll certainly let my colleague Patricia Hazard speak to the tenure of deputies. I would simply say that that my office is important parce que au bureau de la
because we work with the departments and with human resources managers to support them. Therefore, we're always present, even though we don't always use the same tools. Do all deputy ministers of departments, or rather, did they all get that training? And did they apply this plan which you had proposed? Again, last year there were 30 deputy ministers, and there are over 100 departments and agencies. Has everyone taken that training? Is everyone applying the plan that you want to implement for managing human resources?
That in looking at the backgrounds of the deputy ministers who are leading departments, that they have tremendous experience in managing people through their careers, and that's partly what supports them in taking on the big jobs that they do. Also supporting them are their human resources organizations, where you find the human resources professionals who know in detail, let's say the law, like the considerable law affecting human resources management. I think there's around 12 statutes that affect HR management. So it is an area where expertise is required, as well as central policies and other guidance that we would use to support them. So deputies themselves are experienced managers with long backgrounds in people management, but they're also supported by organizations of professionals who help them in exercising their duties.
Would you mind if I added to that answer?
Madame Bourgeois, if we need, you can finish that.
Just to say that there are a number of accountability mechanisms to ensure that the deputy minister's community is responsive to the strategic direction that is set by the Clerk of the Privy Council as head of the public service. One of them is the annual performance management agreement and the whole process that goes along with that to assess whether or not they are putting an appropriate depth of attention to people management. We've also, for the last 3 years, issued annual action plans with specific commitments in them, and every year deputies have reported to the Clerk of the Privy Council how they have done against those commitments. And there is in the annex of each of the clerk's annual reports a scorecard that shows how well the deputies have done against those commitments. So I think there are a number of publicly visible accountability mechanisms.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Holder for 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to say at the outset, if I may, that I think Canada can be honoured to have an amazing staff that serve this country, and I want to give great kudos to the Public Service of Canada, and obviously all of you with your responsibility. I think that needs to be said from this side, because too often I think the direction that we hear gives us a sense that that if I may, you might hear a lot more negatives than positives. But I can tell you, even from the standpoint of as a member of Parliament, where at a constituent level, I hear concerns from time to time at various levels. I hear a lot of positive things as well, and I'd just like to share that with you and pass that forward to you. If I might ask, Madam Meredith, when were you first appointed to your role?
My first day of work was August 31st, 2009.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to the anniversary party. But the first question I have, I'm trying to understand. I mean, why did it take us this much time to get somebody in your role? I say this as a business person that had almost 200 employees, and you know, we had a human resources person in our office almost as soon as I became president of my firm, because even with that number of people, how could you handle it? But I'm thinking 523,000 people is not a small number of people, and I'm sure you had various senior people. But can you explain how that process came about? Because I need to understand that a little bit better, please.
Well, I can certainly explain it from my perspective. I think early, it would have been 2-3 years ago, Patricia would be would know the details in terms of timing. The Prime Minister's Advisory Committee made a report suggesting that governance within the government on HR issues was overly complex, and made a recommendation in one of their annual reports to simplify. And so following from that, I mean, it's not an easy matter. You're dealing with 6 organizations, and you want to make sure that any changes that you make are on the right track. And so they did a thorough review of the organizations, made proposals as to changes that could be made, and as a result of those proposals, last year, I believe it was March last year, the actual machinery was changed to bring what was the Public Service Agency of Canada together with the Treasury Board and to unify the function under a Chief Human Resources Officer. So it's not as if the functions weren't being fulfilled before. They were just being done in a different way, and the view was that it was an overly complex arrangement that confused, in a sense, the roles of central agencies and made life more difficult for deputy ministers who are really supposed to be able to manage their people in a common sense and clear way.
Thank you. I will have a couple more questions if I may, but Madam Hassard, firstly, you've indicated that very shortly we're going to anticipate receiving the annual report to the Prime Minister. It'll be tabled this week, and frankly, I look forward to receiving that report as well. Surprised me, earlier comments from member opposite asked about questions relating to documents from the PCO to Cabinet and whether those were either available or could be shared. And I mean, as you would know, all documents from PCO to Cabinet are deemed confidential. So just to be clear on that, I'm sure my colleague actually really does know that. So just to put that on the record. If I can, Madam Meredith, what I'm concerned about is one of the things that we were going to have today was a dialogue with a demographer to help give us a sense of basically the challenges in our population changes, baby boomers going through and retiring and all. That didn't happen by virtue of scheduling, so that means we have a little more quality time with you. If I've got a concern, is that from what I have read, there's a couple of things. Firstly, that we have a retirement factor that seems to be much earlier in the public service of Canada than we have in the private sector. Are you aware of those details, and does that cause you any concerns?
Well, your understanding is the same as mine, that we are going through an elevated rate of attrition in the public service now relative to, say, 5 years ago. So that now the rate of attrition is around 3.3%, at least certainly above 3%, whereas 5 years ago or so it would have been well below 2%. And if you were to look at, say, a decade in the past, the rate would be sort of average of about 1.5%. So we've hit an accelerated rate of attrition, one that's likely to come down post 2013-14. And I understand that is a little in advance of the private sector and when it's likely to hit its high attrition level.
Could I ask you what's been causing that accelerated rate of attrition in the public service?
Well, it's really the demographics of our workforce, and I think hiring of baby boomers back in the early 80s, starting then. It's sort of numerical, I think. People, in general, the public service has a relatively low rate of attrition through avenues other than retirement. And so our attrition is largely driven by retirement and is therefore really driven by the age of our workforce. And if we were to look at the age of our workforce and sort of the profile, the statistical profile of it, you'd find it over the last 2 decades, say going from relatively weighted on the younger side towards becoming relatively weighted on the older side. And so those are the people who are now eligible for retirement. My
research would suggest the very same thing in terms of an older workforce. Do you have any sense of the mobility issues relating to the Public Service of Canada? My sense, and I must tell you it's anecdotal at this point, is that Public Service of Canada employees tend to stay longer than private than members of private firms. Do you have any feel for that, or anything beyond an anecdotal sense?
My impression would be that they do, because, as I mentioned, the rate of attrition for other factors other than retirement is very, very low.
And have you done any comparisons between, say, the pension plans associated with the public service against those of the private sector?
We've done some work. It's not completed, I'd have to say, but clearly with the focus on pensions and comparability, we are looking at other organizations and trying to get a view as to how we're benchmarked in terms of pension and benefits generally.
Would your sense of pension and benefits, again from a subjective sense, suggest to you that that those types of benefits and pensions are stronger in the public service than they are in the private sector?
I think the fact that we have a defined benefit pension it puts us in sort of a leading group, comparable to other governments, but yeah.
Thank you very much. We now go to Mr. Julian for 8 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Ms. Hassard and Ms. Meredith, for being here today. It's very important that you be here, and as you know, we have many questions.
We had the announcement of the departmental budgetary freeze a few weeks ago, and immediately subsequent to that, we had very high-profile use of the Challenger jet going down, the finance minister going down to Toronto. Then we had the Minister of National Defence who wanted to use the Challenger to go from Ottawa to Vancouver at a time when there were ample flights available. So a cost of $100,000 of a Challenger as opposed to a few $100s just to go by regular airline. And so I'm wondering, in that kind of situation where it's a kind of flagrant contradiction to what has just been announced, and certainly fuels a public perception that perhaps the government has two standards, how within the Treasury Board or the Privy Council office does the system kick in to prevent that kind of thing from happening?
Well, in relation to the budget, the freeze announced in the budget on operating budgets, it is a freeze on operating budgets, not on individual line items within operating budgets, and that's the approach that was chosen. So looking at individual expenditures within that it's not really particularly relevant to the way that the freeze has been applied.
So what you're saying is there isn't really a system of checks and balances as long as the overall budget, whether or not that money is being effectively used, isn't so much a concern as sticking to the freeze itself?
Well, I think the Madam Chair, the main control point for the freeze was on departmental budgets, and they're accountable for their use and for their control. And from a system point of view, we want to ensure that they do remain within their operating budgets. That's what was frozen. But we're not freezing every line item within each budget. They're to be accountable for the use of those funds and making the choices within them.
Madam Chairman, could I just add one thought there? Is I don't want to leave the impression that there are no checks and balances on the use of the Challenger jets. I think we should undertake to provide you with that.
So there is a protocol?
Well, it's not one within my purview, but I think we shouldn't leave the impression that there's none. We need to provide that information to you.
Something that will be providing the commit. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so thank you for that, because it's obviously a public concern. A $100,000 joyride, it's unwarranted, is something that I think certainly raises hackles of people in my constituency. So it would be important to know what the process is. I'd like to move on to the whole issue of what's being cut, what's being increased. One of my colleagues mentioned the PCO increase, and there's also been a marked increase in the budget for prisons. But I mean, we know that if we put money into crime prevention, we actually save money at the end of the line. The normal rule of thumb is $1 invested in crime prevention saves about $6 in policing costs and court costs and prison costs later on. So I'm wondering, around the government's move forward to increase the prison budget, is there within either the Treasury Board or the Privy Council Office a vehicle to evaluate whether that's the best use of public funds or whether that money should go to address the cutbacks that we've seen in crime prevention budgets?
Well, I think, Madam Chair, the budgets of individual departments are voted by Parliament. They're brought here and ultimately are the purview of Parliament, and so are therefore, under things on which you can have a view.
Madam Chair, I think it's important that we keep to the topic at hand. I think we've invited witnesses with a clear description of the type of questions that we would be asking as it relates to their departments and their responsibilities. And I think it's unfair for the witnesses to ask questions that have limited or nothing to do with their respective responsibilities. I think there's always been a practice that in committees, especially when we have civil servants or members of the civil service before us, that we don't engage in political department by department or ask them to comment on decisions that are left in the purview of other responsibilities.
And I thank you for your intervention. I'm sure the witnesses are well aware of what the discussion is. It's the freeze on the impact of the freeze on departmental budgets and its impact on, we're here really listening to demographics and what will the freeze on departmental budgets impact the demographics. So if you could focus in that area, it would be well worth our while, because that's what we're studying. Because there's a shift in demographic change, and that's, I think, the attrition and all the questions that they have and their presentations to really deal with what's going on in that department. And I know you're asking for cuts in different departments, but that's really not the purview here. The Treasury Board Secretariat is the Chief Human Resource Officer, not the Minister of Treasury Board. So if you could guide your questions accordingly. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I hope you're adding on this time to
oh, yes, yes, I stopped the clock.
Thank you very much. No, I was responding to the presentation itself, so it was perfectly in order, as you're well aware.
Fair enough.
Thank you. The next item I'd like to move to is the feedback loop. There was some reference earlier to a scorecard, and the question is the evaluation of services. Certainly, I think, as Member of Parliament, I've been now for nearly 6 years a Member of Parliament, I've seen some service deterioration, for example, in areas like employment insurance, citizenship and immigration. In other words, the response time. It's not because the public servants aren't working very hard. It's because sometimes cuts or freezes have an impact on service quality. So I'm wondering the feedback loop that exists there to ensure that services don't degrade further through the process of the freeze. Now, there was a mention of a scorecard. I'm not sure who's doing the evaluating. Could you comment a bit more on that, please?
I'd like to comment in terms of the scorecard or the means of measuring performance when it comes to HR management, which is my purview. You've made reference to employment insurance or other issues that would be more the purview of Service Canada, and I won't answer to those specifically, but in the area of human resource management, over the past several years, we've developed, we think, quite a good way of measuring departmental performance when it comes to values and ethics, as well as on people management. We use survey and other sort of raw data on staffing times and whatnot to get a good, although sort of grainy picture of how departments are doing, and a basis on which we can sort of compare one to the other, and in a sense get a measure of the leadership and management of those departments. So we're very much in that world of measuring performance on human resources issues.
Thank you. Just to clarify, then, these are surveys to recipients.
Well, we undertook in 2008 a public service employee survey this was of all public service employees, asking them a range of questions that related to their engagement in the workplace and to leadership and to values and ethics and other issues that we felt and that other organizations had been using as well to corroborate the sort of performance on HR management.
OK.
Very brief question.
Dernière question, c'est à propos de toute la question.
My first question has to do with public service renewal. There is an underrepresentation of visible minorities or people whose mother tongue is neither English nor French. Is there any way to ensure that the freeze will not negatively impact the recruitment of these new Canadians within the federal public service? And would this be part of public service renewal? Madam Chair, thank you for that excellent question.
Right now, about 10% of the public service is visible minorities that would be considered visible minorities as one employment equity group. That would be about 2% under sort of a comparable measure of workforce availability. And so we recognize that there is a gap in our terms that is an issue for us. The good news is that we are recruiting at higher levels from that group, that category, in upwards of 18%. And we have some measurement issues as between us in the Public Service and the Public Service Commission. And so the President of the Commission might say it's above 20%. Our data shows above 18%. At any rate, the main point is that with the accelerated recruitment from that community, we expect to see an increase in the representation of visible minorities in the public service. The main point being that we're continuing to hire. Just because there is a freeze in operating budgets doesn't mean that we'll stop hiring. In fact, we know it's absolutely important that we continue to hire. We can't expect to renew the public service if we don't hire, and especially in view of all the attrition that is now going on, we absolutely need to do so.
Thank you. The analyst just reminded me, you mentioned a scorecard. If we could have a copy of it for our benefit so we can have a look at it as well. Thank you. We go to the next round of questions, and Madame Siobhan Cody for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I certainly appreciate you taking the time to appear before us today and for giving us some clear testimony. My question, I guess, really is a follow-through on the last question that you answered, that you will continue to hire, because I'm a little confused here. And I'm going to use Stats Canada numbers, because everywhere I look, there's different numbers for the public service. So I'm going to stick with Stats Canada. Stats Canada, for example, in 2006 said there were roughly 380,000 employees, and as of last year, there were 419. Those are Stats Canada's numbers. Took them off their website. So you went from 380 to 419,000, which is a significant, almost a 40,000 person impact in terms of net increase in jobs. Of course, there was some attrition there as well. Now we're starting to talk about attrition being some of the factors, for example, in how this budget is going to be balanced or close on being balanced. For example, Treasury Board President Stockwell Day was at the Economic Club of Canada today, and he talked about freezes and cuts to the public service will take the government, I think these are his words, take the government to zero on the budget by 2014. He said that today in the Economic Club. Now, I think the Parliamentary Budget Office doesn't see that it's going to go to zero, but let's take it at face value that it'll go to zero by 2014. But he did talk about freezes and cuts to the public sector. I just heard you talk about that you'll likely have to continue to hire. There's a renewal within the public service. We know about attrition. I'm sure, like business people, of which I'm one, for the last 20 years you've been planning for this demographic blip that we can call that's occurring. So I know you receive Treasury Board submissions from departments. I know you receive those on a regular basis. Where's the impact from this budget freeze? that's what my question is. So is it going to come, is there across-the-board reduction in the annual reference level updates? Is it by program? Can you explain how you're going to do it, just based on the fact that now we've heard Stockwell Day on this issue? I'm hearing from you that they're not likely that you're going to have to continue to hire. I understand that. The increases over the last 4 years have been basically roughly 10,000 per year. It could have been more early, I don't know, but it's been 40,000 over the last 4 or 5 years. I'm anxious to hear how you think that's going to occur. And I'm sure you're the one with the Treasury Board submission, so you would know more than me.
Well, I think the main point is that the operating budgets will be frozen, and that'll be done within their votes, what's voted to them by Parliament. And so that is what will be controlled, and it allows then individual departments the latitude to determine how they're going to meet that budget freeze. And I think each department will have different realities around their attrition rates. For example, is one potential opportunity for downsizing, and I think they need to look at that. They need to look at where they're going to be recruiting. I guess the main point is that it's up to them to determine their future.
Heard you say that, and as Chief Human Resources Officer, I would assume you would have some role in that under the Treasury Board submissions, or you should have some role in that in the Treasury Board submission to ensure proper funding for government departments and proper service levels, because what we don't want to have cut, of course, is services to Canadians. I see you nodding your head there. I'm just going to give you an illustration. We've been talking a little bit about the PCO, and we've been saying that there is, there has been an increase in the PCO. And this year, for example, coming out of your plans and priorities, the report on plans and priorities, we see a $3.6 million for government-wide communications. To support that, there are 20 people working in PCO, 15 in PM and minister support, and 5 in internal services, just to give you an illustration. Do you suspect, and I don't want to talk about those particular individuals, but that will be the kind of positions review, I would think, and will you have some oversight in that going forward to ensure that the services to Canadians are not impacted?
We will, of course, be ensuring that they meet their operating budget freezes, and they, in turn, will be demonstrating that they're meeting service levels because they'll want to do so.
Don't have oversight of the Treasury Board submissions that talks about number of staffing and things of that nature on an ongoing basis. That's what I'm hearing from you.
The key is that they're the ones that are accountable for meeting the freeze and maintaining the service levels.
As Human Resources Officer, you don't have a role in that. So in terms of numbers of employees, I'm just looking at the growth in the public service from 360 to 419, or so those were around 380 to 419, so about a 40,000 increase over 4 years. And now we're saying we're going to freeze department spending. You're certainly not going to be able to hire that many employees. You've got an increase in the planning and priorities budgets for PCO, and you're going to have to look at that as a go forward. I'm just wondering the process for how you look at that. But I'm going to turn to another question.
Your time's up. You can give a quick one.
Quick question. Management consultants. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of money gone into that area, $586 million. We do know they're tracked under Central Financial Management Reporting System. Can you please give to the committee, because I'm out of time, give to the committee what has been used to date and how many of the management consultants in what areas? You do have it tracked, I understand, through a data system?
Management consulting, I'd have to return to the committee on that. My purview is more public servants. Yeah.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. We now go to Madame Bourgeois, and you're sharing your time with Monsieur Nadeau.
Oui, avec
for
Monsieur
5
Nadeau.
minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like everybody to talk about the same thing. I get the impression that we are talking on 2 levels at once. Ms. Hassard, in your brief, you say that we have to strengthen our management system. This is on page 12. On page 12 as well, you say that managers are the leaders for change and for our organizational culture. On page 14, you say we have made more rigorous the management program for senior managers. If I understand correctly, you ladies who are here today, your job is to manage the managers and deputy ministers. You do not manage human resources because managers and deputy managers are responsible for managing those people, which is why you cannot answer the questions of my colleagues. They asked you whether you could assure us that so and so many people will not leave and that we will manage the public service well. But again, you can't answer that question because managers manage human resources. Mr. Kevin Lynch, in his 2009 report, stated, or rather explained, the assessment model for the performance of deputy ministers. According to Mr. Lynch, there are 4 criteria. 1, the policy and programs results. So the results would indicate whether deputy ministers have managed based on the plan put in place. 2nd, management results. 3rd, leadership results. And 4, the self-assessment. And they grade their own performance. Then there is a performance assessment based, which is quantitative and qualitative. If a manager spent 50,000 less, that would be a good thing. Then there is peer review, so deputy ministers evaluating their peers, and then there is feedback. And if results are satisfactory, managers and deputy managers in 2005-2006 collected a performance bonus of 6.5%, 9% the following year. The year after that, 9.4%. Did this bonus go up for 2008-2009? Possibly. So, in fact, what we here on the committee are trying to understand is how the freeze of operational budgets will affect human resources and these services delivered to Canadians. And that's fine. I have nothing against you personally, but you can't answer our questions because our witnesses manage deputy ministers. We should have called the deputy ministers, the 124 deputy ministers, to appear before the committee to answer our questions. That's all I had to say, Madam Chair. No, that is my opinion. And now I'll give the floor to my colleague.
Yeah.
2 minutes, Madame la Présidente.
1 minute.
2 minutes.
La question.
The demographics of the public service. In the chart you gave us, the 523 federal public servants, they work for agencies and departments. What about crown corporations? Are they included in this number, such as Canada Post? Just a yes or no, please.
Okay,
so if I understand correctly, these 523,000 people are employees of the federal government. That is the total number of federal government employees, correct?
The total universe, yes.
Maintenant, on parle.
So we're talking about people who are retiring, and the numbers of people retiring is fairly high. How are you going to fill those positions? In fact, this is my first question. With these strategies you have implemented, how are you going to fill these positions? Or is there going to be a lack or a shortfall of people being recruited from year to year to fill those vacant positions? And do you think this will mean it'll become harder for people who are left behind? Well, I think Canadians are, many Canadians want to work for the public service. In fact, I heard the president of the Public Service Commission who said that more than 1 million people applied for positions within the federal government.
The year of recent records. So there's a lot of interest in working for the public service. I don't think that that's our issue. I think we need to, for the future, we need to determine what are the jobs that we want to be done for the future public service, and how do we recruit for our future. We need to continue recruiting, as I mentioned, and we need to recruit the right people to position us well for the future.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Walkington for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for coming this afternoon. We appreciate your testimony. Today we're trying to get a handle on a number of things, and I think there's a number of different lines of questioning that have been undertaken. My line of questioning will relate to the civil service, the demographics, and possibly the challenges that we might see. We I guess have heard that 3.3% of the civil service retired this year, this past year. Is that correct? That was the correct number?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Yeah.
In addition to the 3.3%, I know that we've heard testimony in the past at this committee about the movement of people within the civil service, so people that are not necessarily leaving the civil service but moving around the civil service. I'm wondering if you have a statistic as it relates to those people that have moved within the civil service this year. So this would be in addition to so people that have changed jobs.
We have various data on people who've changed jobs. We have it to some extent broken down by occupational group, and so I think it's a little bit of it's not a simple answer.
Okay.
If I could commit to getting it to the committee,
I'd appreciate that. I think we've heard in testimony in this committee before that it was somewhere around 40%, and that may be a simplistic statistic, and maybe it doesn't give us or paint the whole picture for us. So if you could highlight anything as it relates to that, that would be helpful. In terms of the civil service being ahead of the private sector as it relates to older employees and the attrition within it, my concern is that as the private sector enters this time of increased retirees, there's going to be additional pressure on the public service because the private sector is going to recruit from the public service, because of course we have some of the best and brightest in the country. Is that something that you've identified as a concern, and has there been any kind of plan in place to address that? Because I think what we've seen, especially in provinces or regions where there's been high employment rates, especially over the last 5 years. I come from the province of Alberta. What we've seen is very often our government employees are being poached or recruited from those positions to the private sector. And as we see this coming on a wholesale fashion across the country with the demographic shift within the private sector, I'm wondering if there's a plan in place to address that concern.
Well, thanks for the question. I think it's something that we're always kind of generally concerned about, recruitment and retention of public service employees. The data, in terms of demographics, as I mentioned, suggests that people, especially in the older half of the workforce, aren't leaving in high numbers, except for retirement right now. So in terms of the data, it doesn't suggest that it's in reality a problem for us with that segment.
What's on that, and just branching out from it, what is the average age of a civil servant that's leaving the public sector? So when they retire, what's the average age? Do you have that number?
I do. It's between 55 and 60, and I think it's around 57 years old, but I'd like to be able to,
does anybody
also thinks it's 57. I think
do I have a little bit more time?
Just ask for the spread.
Does anybody do any exit surveys to find out if in fact these folks are leaving to, in fact, full-time retirement, or if they're going into other jobs in the private sector?
We're not tracking that now.
Okay.
Excuse me, we certainly do exit interviews with all of our deputy ministers who leave the public service. That's a recent innovation. Mainly it's not to talk about their future so much as their past and the experiences they've had and what we can learn from that.
In terms of the, I don't know if this falls within your purview, and I apologize if it doesn't. I'm wondering, as we put plans in place, if there's any effort to streamline redundant or non-core services of the work that civil servants are doing. So, in cases where there's possibly redundant services or services that could be provided by other departments or other people within other departments, such as payroll or non-core services such as that, is there any effort to consolidate those types of non-core services to more efficiently address those non-core services within the civil service?
We're looking at efficiencies all the time, and the pay modernization project is one such project that should bring enormous efficiencies in the future. We're also doing modernization of our pension delivery system as well, just in terms of the basic information technology that goes behind that. In addition, we've got some, I think, really path-breaking work when it comes to basic HR business processes. A concern in the past has been that departments go at their internal systems alone and independently of one another, which can be a costly way to do things. And I think what's quite exciting about the project underway is that departments have collaborated. They've decided on a common business process governing HR. They have further design work to do, but it will become the foundation, let's say, for a streamlined, efficient, and I think hugely cost-effective way of proceeding on sort of HR.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I feel I would be remiss if I didn't mention what had been announced in the speech from the throne and the budget, which is the review of administrative services. The government recently announced a deputy minister who will be in charge of that, and it will look at all internal services for exactly what you were talking about, to avoid duplication, reduce overhead costs, look at what efficiencies can be found. So I just want to make sure that you were aware of that.
Thank you. And Madam Meredith, you made a commitment to provide the information on turnover in public sector to Mr. Walkington and the spread between people coming in and leaving, so that we know what the attrition is and what is being hired, so we know what the gap is. Thank you. We'll now go to Madam Hall-Findlay for 5 minutes.
And Madam Chair, I may end up splitting time with my colleague just because my questions are fairly short, I hope to think. To Ms. Meredith, I'm a little bit concerned about a disconnect that we're hearing. We're being told that next year we're going to have across-the-board departmental freezes. Last week we had representation from Treasury Board when asked about detail, and we're told, well, we haven't had any direction. Which is a bit troubling when a government announces a significant thing like across-the-board departmental freezes and then no direction. So can I just ask you rather bluntly, were you consulted before the announcement was made that there would be these significant across all department freezes?
I could simply report, Madam Chair, that those freezes were made.
No, my question was, were you consulted before the freezes were announced?
Well, clearly, before any budget, there is consultation across the board in government.
So was that a yes? You were consulted?
Well, I would not normally talk about details of advice or any other, but
I'm sorry to be blunt, but we have very little time.
We do of course provide advice on every budget, as we did this one.
So because my question then goes to, there seems to be a lack of information. I mean, several of my colleagues have been asking, well, how is this going to happen? what are the different ministries going to be doing in terms of dealing with the freeze? I'm hearing you say, and actually Ms. Hassard suggested the same a little bit in the report, fairly glowing. Yes, we will be hiring people. Yes, we are going to be looking for renewal and hiring the best people and wanting to recruit. As a former business person, if I'm looking at a budget freeze, it's a bit inconsistent to then glowingly talk about all of the people we're going to continue to hire. So have you been consulted? Are you engaged in discussions now? Do you have a plan on how you're going to reconcile continuing to hire when next year every department is going to have an across-the-board departmental freeze? And if so, how is that gelling with what you're now saying, which still continues to sound very rosy, with your hiring plans and your renewal plans?
Thanks for the question. I certainly have a plan for my own organization. I have a plan to work with my assistant deputy ministers to look at the staffing that we're doing and to make sure that we're continuing to do staffing. I also want to support deputy ministers with respect to human resources management. I cited an initiative that we're undertaking with them on business processes, one that can lead to great efficiencies in the future, and those kinds of measures will make it are really useful for deputies who need to control their operating budgets to that level. I mean, one thing that I was that I think some of the feedback from the budget was, I think a certain let's say positive response that we were controlling at the right level. We weren't micromanaging from the center expenditures on this and that. Instead, we were leaving it to departments to determine how they were going to meet the freeze in a way that maintained service levels, and I think gave them flexibility.
Cody,
because we have a circle going on here. In your report, you said this new regime is putting accountability for the management of human resources management back in the hands of deputy minister, and that your key role is ensuring deputies have the flexibility to do this. So you do have an oversight mechanism. You are part of Treasury Board. You have a plan. You support the HR function. Deputy ministers have to come to Treasury Board for the requirements. So there has to be some kind of plan for this budget freeze. If it doesn't rest with you, whom does it rest with? If it rests with deputy ministers, they have to report back to Treasury Board. So we're kind of, can you close that circle? You can't have 124 deputy ministers come before committee, so you must close that loop for me, if you would, please.
To the extent that not everything that every ministry does has to be approved by Treasury Board, but of course things that do meet need to be approved by Treasury Board.
The money does have to be approved. So if the money goes up or money goes down, it has to be approved by Treasury Board.
Well, there's some latitude for departments to reallocate funding within their own budgets to meet requirements. For speaking for myself, I can reallocate. I can move staff from one area to another without going to Treasury Board. I can look at my program and how I want to deliver it most efficiently, and shift staff around within my own purview, as other departments can. It's not every single thing that needs Treasury Board approval.
No, and I think if somebody could clarify, if you could clarify at the end, that you're not the Deputy Minister of Treasury Board, but you're the Chief Financial Officer who is responsible. Can you let me finish? Responsible for 27 collective agreements, and how does that, your role in terms of being responsible for collective agreements, tie into budgets being done? So that way perhaps we have clarity. At the moment it is confusing as to what your role really is. So if you could do it at the end. Monsieur Gourde.
Madam
Yes,
Chair.
sir.
Twice now in this meeting, we've had a member opposite ask a question with respect to discussions that have taken place between Privy Council office and PCO. And I'd like to reference, if I may, page 1068, chapter 20, that says, and I'd like to quote this briefly, Particular attention is paid to the questioning of public servants. The obligation of a witness to answer all questions put by the committee must be balanced against the role the public servants play in providing confidential advice to their ministers. The role of the public servant has traditionally been viewed in relation to the implementation and administration of government policy.
Cut you off, Mr.
No,
Holder.
Madam Chair, you
I'll
cannot
tell you
because...
why. I'll tell you why.
I'm two
Because
sentences
point
away.
of
We're going to talk
order-
longer than this if you don't let me finish, please.
I will let you finish because
Thank you.
the clerk is telling me that this is not a point of order, this is a point of debate as
Thank
to
you.
the interpretation.
No, Madam Chair. In fact, I would look to you, please, as
Yes,
Chair,
yes.
to challenge when someone asks a question which, frankly, is not appropriate.
And I think we did when they are asking the question, but nobody has. When Mr. Julian did, I had to allow Mr. Walkington, and his point of order was well taken. His intervention was well taken, and Mr. Julian was advised that this is really dealing with, and that's why I came back to this is the Chief Human Resource Officer. So when you're asking questions, please couch it under the domain.
But my
of
point of order is to you,
demographics.
Madam Chair, because I think you do have the opportunity and the obligation to have an intervention to say that's not a question that's appropriate.
Thank you, and we'll proceed. Mr. Good, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. There's one issue I'm concerned about as far as retirees are concerned. Earlier you said the average age of retirement was 57. These people have a great deal of experience. Now, must these people leave at a certain point, or if they want to stay on and work a few additional years, if they feel they still have more challenges to face, and I'm sure that there are people who would want to do this, can they?
Explicit age of retirement where people are forced to retire. They're quite able to stay on. And if I could correct for the record, my colleague has just given me the age of retirement as it was in 2008 and 2009. I guess that's an average over that year. And I underestimate it's 58.6 years. Sorry. But yes, they can stay beyond that. It's their choice as to when they retire.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Now, as for these very experienced people who decide to retire, I'm sure there is a process involving knowledge transfer. How is that done? Can it complicate the way human resources are managed if knowledge transfer is not done appropriately from top managers who leave and pass it on to people who will replace them?
Yeah, of course, and it is a very good question. We are, as I mentioned, facing accelerated retirement now, 3.3% a year on average in recent years. And so we do need to concentrate on how we're retaining the knowledge. Part of how we're trying to do it is anticipating retirements before they come up and ensuring that the knowledge and skills that those people have are explicitly being transferred through coaching or mentoring of new staff coming along. Part of it is in identifying when people are going to be retiring. They do have flexibility, and sometimes people don't want to say when they're going to retire. We've found, and that can be a bit of an issue for us. But I think trying to transfer person to person their skills through coaching and mentoring, as well as through ensuring we have kind of information systems that capture what we need from their corporate memory is also important.
Could I also add that I referred to a scorecard earlier, and perhaps I could just clarify that that is a scorecard which gives the results of deputies' commitments in the public service renewal action plans. We've had 3 of them so far, and the 4th one will be issued shortly. And in it, there will be a specific commitment for deputy ministers to assure themselves that knowledge transfer practices are taken into consideration for succession planning and talent management, and for any of their critical positions. So we're very aware of this as a live issue, and we are asking that community to report on their efforts.
1 minute.
Oui, je suis heureux de voir.
Well, I'm pleased to learn that there are programs such as mentoring programs which will help retain the knowledge in the public service. Have some retired public servants asked to keep on working part-time, say 3 days a week? Can these people be accommodated? These people who wish to keep on working but not full-time?
Provisions for those who are retired to return as casual employees. I mean, there's various avenues for them to contribute post-retirement. One is as casual employees, another would be as term employees, or another would be through contract arrangements, all of which, you know, there's certain guidelines around what can be done. For example, for them to return as casual employees, there's a limit of 90 days in any department in which they would work, and there are other sort of norms and rules around how they're engaged, etc. But there are avenues for them to do that.
Merci.
Thank you very much. We now go to Monsieur Nadeau for 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When public servants choose to retire, are sometimes agreements entered into before they actually leave? Do they sign a contract with the government or with the department which they work for to stay on, but as contract employees?
They would not do that. I'd have to look at the exact provisions, but I'm fairly sure that there are provisions against them staying on as contract employees. They wouldn't be able to do that, to enter into those arrangements pre-retirement. In fact, they're likely there's a period during which they, you know, they're not able to do that.
Mais excusez-moi, mais est-ce que vous parlez à ce moment-ci des...
I'm sorry, are you talking about senior officials, deputy ministers, or are you referring to all public servants, all of the 523,000 public servants? Do they all fall under that same rule, or would it only apply to senior managers? Well, no, I'm not referring to the 523,000 public servants, because that's the entire public service.
Public administration, and that's
Okay.
the group to which Treasury Board rules
Donc, ce que
apply.
vous me dites, c'est que vous n'êtes pas en mesure de...
So what you're telling me is that you cannot give an answer for all public servants.
First of all, our purview is with the smaller group, and I'd have to get the details
Okay,
for you.
je vais passer à une autre.
Well, that's fine. I'll ask another question. Public service renewal, hiring new people. We know that people are retiring in greater numbers. So what is your approach? Do you try to raid other levels of government, municipal or provincial governments? Apart from trying to recruit at the university level, are you more targeted? And are you seeking people to fill key positions in the federal government? Do you therefore conduct a targeted search of managers, say, even elsewhere amongst the immigrant community?
Is done mainly by departments. My group, my office does not hire for the whole public service. We hire for ourselves, not for the whole public service. But speaking of the public service, there's various avenues. There's the post-secondary recruitment drive that's the Public Service Commission is in charge of. And there's also mid-career recruitment. In fact, you might be surprised to learn, I know I was, that the average age of a recruit to the public service is now at 35 years old. So it's we're drawing from mid-career as well as post-secondary populations. So that the average age is 35 years. And we have, departments have their initiatives to hire from outside the public service. Often they're aided by the Public Service Commission in sort of doing, establishing pools of people that might come in from outside. For example, in the recent past, we've tried to attract people with financial credentials because there was a shortage, let's say, of professionals with that expertise, as well as auditors. So we are, through planning, try to identify what are our needs for the future, look at how well we are equipped to supply those needs globally.
De 5 minutes, là, Concorde, question.
Last question. When it comes to hiring new managers, and this, of course, is more specific to your mandate, we've heard that the private sector might be more appealing, that it would pay more and provide better benefits than the federal government. The same thing is happening at the provincial and municipal level, and they see that the private sector has certain advantages. And well, what is your take on this situation?
A preferred employer. I think we are an excellent employer, and we have certain organizations, Statistics Canada, the Farm Credit Corporation, and others in the core administration that have proven themselves to be among the top employers. I think are so I think that we are well positioned to attract people to the public service. I think we've looked at attitudes of those looking at career options, and I think the gurus would tell us that the workforce of today is looking to make a difference, perhaps in greater numbers even than in the past. And so that motive, along with the compensation package that we offer, positions us extremely well to attract those.
Thank you. And now we go to Mr. Julian for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to come back to the freeze and its possible impact on laying off employees. Have you estimated how this freeze would affect certain areas such as British Columbia, for instance? This is an area I come from. So, again, have you evaluated the impact of this freeze across the country?
Departmental budgets, and it is up to departments to ensure that they're respecting the limits on operating budgets. It will be to them to look at impacts regionally. And obviously, it's very early days. We've had the freeze has been announced only in the last few weeks, and departments will be looking at how they're going to meet it. But there's, that will be certainly something for them to look at.
But would that be something that's compiled by Treasury Board? I mean, you get Manitoba, you get the estimates in from a number of different departments, you get the estimates in from British Columbia, and you compile them?
It's not part of our regular job to compile, the regional distribution of spending. I mean, obviously, it's done through some means, but it's not a regular Treasury Board activity to look at the regional distribution of spending.
No, I'm speaking specifically to potential layoffs. If there are positions that are laid off across the country, or there are estimates of what the impacts would be of the freeze, how is that then compiled so that we have a good sense of what the impacts are in British Columbia or Manitoba or Quebec or Newfoundland and Labrador?
Well, I can tell you from our experience with the program review, which involved a sizable downsizing of the public service back in the 1990s. One thing that we learned was that we have to be sensitive to regional impacts, and in fact, I do get out to the regions personally from time to time, and they're, of course, already talking to me about the regional impact of any initiatives that we might be taking. Now, in this context, it's a freeze. It's not actually a cut in spending. It is a freeze in spending, and I think that's important to note in terms of, what we might expect in terms of impact.
Okay, just help me here. I'm just trying to see at what point for this committee, for example, that information might come back. I understand it's early days, but at some point there needs to be an estimate. And even if the estimate is no layoffs, that's great. But somebody is handling and compiling the overall impact. It's not done department by department. It's channeled normally through the PCO or through the Treasury Board.
Well, I believe that the reporting is really done on a department by department basis, first and foremost, and that would be the first place to look.
Okay, I'd like to move on to another issue. Fascinating information about the average retirement age, nearly 59. And you, Mr. Workington, asked a question earlier about to whether or not there were estimates about people going into the private sector and working as opposed to going to full retirement. Have there been any internal surveys that either of you are aware of that show the percentage of public servants that might choose to stay on a part-time or casual basis if there were changes made or improvements made to that kind of situation, so that in a sense they could continue to provide their expertise to the federal government, and there may be some mechanisms that permit them to do that with a partial pension or other arrangements. Is there anything internally that you're aware of that's been done to indicate how things might be changed to facilitate that?
Well, I think do we have measures in terms of, for example, what judges have to
Mr.
stay
Julian.
on? And
Go ahead. Sorry, respond. But I'm just letting him know that he can't ask you any more questions.
I've enjoyed it.
Okay.
sort of, the kind of regime that judges have to stay on in supernumerary status that allows them to work a shorter time but still receive their full pension benefits in the future. We don't have that kind of a regime. As I mentioned, there are opportunities to work on a casual basis if there's mutual interest in bringing these people back, but no sort of special part-time provisions, let's say, for that are related to the pension plan.
Thank you. We now go on to Mr. Holder for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And again, to our guests, I'd like to say thank you for your candor and your participation today. I want to stress, if I may, something that Madame Meredith said in response to a query by my colleague, Mr. Julian. And I'll quote you directly, Madame Meredith, where you said, "It is a freeze, not a cut in spending." And I think that's the key that I'd like to stress with the committee today. Madam Hassard, a question for you, if I can. You, in your presentation, which was very good, you made a couple of very strong comments. You said that, quote, "public service renewal is our top management strategy." The second thing you said, and I quote it is about making sure that the federal public service continually improves its ability to deliver on the business of government. I think that's well said. What I'd like to ask you is, during Mr. Workington's questions, I think perhaps both of you indicated that you are working towards a more efficient and more effective public service. I'm trying to get a sense from you, if you have any estimates in terms of savings that your process relating to your strategic foundation of renewal, which began basically a couple of years ago. That may not be fair to you, Madam Meredith, because you've just recently come into this role. but I'm trying to get a sense of any sense of how effective that policy has been in relation to financial savings and in relation to personnel.
When we embarked on the renewal initiative, the underlying objective was not cost saving. It was to make sure that the services and the policies and the programs were as high quality as possible, and that the government in Canada were well served. So it's not something that we have tracked during the Public Service Renewal Initiative. As I mentioned, we have tracked very much the accomplishments during those times and have set strategic directions that I can assure you we've made some progress on. I think we are in a somewhat different game at the moment with the operating freeze, and I don't want to sound like Pollyanna, but I think there's an opportunity as well as a challenge, and that opportunity is to find ways to do our work more smartly or more efficiently, and to look at our processes, look at those things that might be old-fashioned or redundant, and actually improve them. So I do think this is the time where we're going to have to play our part in fiscal restraint, and that's the approach that we would like to take.
Do you have any sense, when you've talked about tracking the accomplishments that you've been able to achieve, and I think it's I appreciate what you say when you say this was not related to personnel cuts. This was all about trying or savings in relation to losing personnel. This was more about trying to do things more effectively, more efficiently, things that that Canadians would expect us in government as a responsive government to do. Are you able to elaborate on any of those accomplishments that have happened since you undertook this renewal strategy?
Thank you for the question. I do have a number of things I wanted to say. As I mentioned, there were 4 pillars of our renewal initiative, and I think probably the most important one was planning, in that our HR planning was done in isolation from our business planning. So we made it a commitment that these two exercises would be integrated, and with integrated planning you have a better sense of where your gaps are, where your priorities are, and how you allocate your resources. And I think that it's fair to say that now, after our 3rd year, that we have embedded a culture of much more sophisticated planning in each of the departments. I think in terms of recruitment, we've had a series of very successful enterprise-wide job fairs across the country, and that these have improved the brand, which was a little tarnished, of the public service, and that we've engaged students and some of our new recruits in excitement about being in the public service. And I think it's given them a bit of pride, and has actually made us a more attractive employer. We've also steadily been improving our diversity within the public service. In terms of employee development, that was another one of the pillars. Every single employee within every single department must have a learning plan. And I think the first couple of years, the deputies were reporting that they actually had done learning plans. The question was whether they were appropriately linked to what the business needs are. And I think as we remain consistent, we remain committed, that every year we see progress in that regard. And of course, when you have employees who are motivated by being developed in their positions, you have a much more engaged workforce who's going to be more creative, more committed to your mission.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And as I was listening to points of order and questions coming through, and I listened to your presentation, and I think I know where the confusion came through, because you're the Chief Human Resource Officer who represents the government, and you state that you provide strategic enterprise-wide leadership. And I think that's where people wanted to know, with the demographic shift, with the freeze, how do you balance the two as a Chief Human Resource Officer for the Government of Canada, and how do you then know or not know about what impact is happening in British Columbia or Manitoba in the public service as a whole, because there must be a plan somewhere that you're aware of, whether it's option analysis, etc. So if you could explain even to us later on so we would at least get a feel for what your job really is and whether we were asking you the wrong questions. Thank you. I know, but it is say so.
suspension?
Oh, yeah. Suspend for 30 seconds, and we'll go into camera.
In camera.
In camera. Into